Kati Marton has been a friend to Dayton since the time of the Accords, which were brokered by her husband, Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, and a friend to the Dayton Literary Peace Prize since the untimely death of Ambassador Holbrooke, after which he graciously gave us permission to rename our Lifetime Achievement Award for him. A best-selling author, Marton has combined a career as a writer with human rights advocacy. From 2003 to 2008, she chaired the International Women's Health Coalition, a global leader in promoting and protecting the health and human rights of women and girls. From 2001 to July 2002, she was chief advocate for the Office of the Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict at the UN. From 2000 to 2011, she was a member of the Board of Human Rights Watch. Marton is currently a director and formerly chair of the Committee to Protect Journalists. She also serves on the board of directors of the International Rescue Committee and the New America Foundation, a public policy think tank. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, PEN International, and the Authors Guild, and sits on the board of Central European University. Since 1980, she has published 9 books and contributed as a reporter to numerous newspapers, journals, and magazines. Her latest book, True Believer, Stalin's Last American Spy, was published this year. Her memoir, Paris, A Love Story, was published in August 2012 and became an immediate New York Times bestseller. Her impressive list of awards includes the Commander's Cross of the Order of Merit of the Republic of Hungary, presented to her by the President of the Republic of Hungary. She is the honorary chair of Dayton Literary Peace Prize Ambassador Richard C. Holbrooke Award for Distinguished Achievement. Sounds like Superwoman. Kati Marton.
Thank you, Will, for that absolutely embarrassing introduction. I loved every minute of it. I just didn't know why you had to make it so short. Ladies and gentlemen, my heart is full. It is wonderful to be back with you this evening, and indeed, the timing of this dinner could not be more appropriate. Like many of you, I've been in a state of some post-traumatic shock, and tonight I feel hope surging. I feel renewed energy and certainly inspiration to be in the presence of the finest and the most distinguished practitioners of my craft of writing. It's truly inspirational and nourishing in so many ways. It really is one of my life's great privileges these days, these years since Richard's death, to be part of Sharon's remarkable transformation of Dayton into a city that stands for great writing and for peace. Richard would be so honored to be associated with this. So Sharon, I don't know where you are, but wherever you are, there you are. Thank you so much for this tremendous privilege and honor for both Richard and for myself. And this year it seems doubly, trebly meaningful. We really have, under this award, honored the most talented writers in in our country, the most original, and so we do this evening with Marilynne Robinson, who is one of the most breathtakingly talented and lyrical of our writers, whose portraits of Americans struggling with life's most painful choices right here in the heartland are so spiritually satisfying and somehow in these fevered times very calming. So both her breathtaking talent and her deep engagement in our public life make Marilynne the perfect recipient for a prize named for a very public man. Allow me to say a few words about Richard and his legacy. Still hard. I'm looking out at my daughter Elizabeth, who I'm so happy she was able to join me this year because she was very close to Richard and is now herself a United Nations official fighting for peace. So I think Richard played. Lizzie, stand up. And this afternoon, our dear friend, Commissioner Joseph, Matt, please stand up also because you've been such a big part of this. Gave Lizzie and me a tour of all the sort of pilgrimage spots where Richard played a role during those historic days, exactly 21 years ago, and I think it was meaningful for Lizzie. So Dayton is enormously important to my family. Right here, behind the barbed wire of Wright-Patterson Air Base, Richard and his team helped to end the bloodiest war since World War II, and the new country of Bosnia-Herzegovina was born here. All of this history occurred not in some European palace, but in Dayton, Ohio, in the American heartland, which is one reason why Richard chose this as the venue for the peace talks. Here, warlords who just weeks before were mortal enemies agreed to disarm. The worst of them were eventually led to face the world's judgment in The Hague in handcuffs. Not a shot has been fired in anger in Bosnia in 21 years. And Sarajevo, which back then looked like Aleppo today hums with life. American leadership achieved this. America saved a Muslim community from genocide. I urge you not to allow I urge you, please, not to allow those facts to become just so many dead words in history books. I was privileged to have been present during those historic days behind the barbed wire and to have played a very minor role when asked by Richard to do so. Richard was one to use any available instrument to reach his goal, and I was sometimes available to take a warlord for a walk around the beautiful parking lot of Wright-Patterson. And those were chilly days, just like today, chilly November days, or to coax another into good behavior over breakfast at Paki's Sports Bar. That was Milosevic's favorite hangout, by the way. Or occasionally dinner in town at L'Auberge, which I understand has now closed, which we had many historic evenings there too. Failure was more often in the air than success during those cold days. So many other attempts at ending that brutal war had crashed. But I have to tell you that I have never witnessed more creativity, more zeal, and more dedication to purpose than I observed in the barracks that I shared with Richard and his remarkable team. So yes, history was made here, but history is continuous. It takes no timeouts. It is not something that happens to other people in faraway lands. It is happening to us now with a vengeance. We are living a dangerous moment. The poison of nationalism and its evil twin, hate, is spreading in Bosnia and elsewhere in Europe, and most alarmingly, in our own land. Hate spreads much faster than love. I observed that 2 decades ago in the Balkans. Europe is rapidly unlearning its own history. We Americans have far less historical baggage than Europe, of course. That's why we're here. But we're perhaps at the same time less aware of history's lessons. And I can assure you, having just a few days ago returned from Hungary, my homeland, and from France, that populist leaders in those countries were among the first to congratulate our president-elect. They recognize one of their own. In Bosnia, the nationalist Serb leader claims that our election result is a turning point for the US's role in the Balkans. In other words, it's a good day for separatists, for racists, and for haters. It is testing time for our nation. Just what do we still stand for? The Dayton Peace Accords that we celebrate tonight cannot survive if nationalists grab power in Bosnia and are encouraged to do so by Moscow, by Belgrade, by possibly Paris, which is also facing elections, and dare I add, Washington. It's that simple. History is continuous, and the world has never been smaller or more vulnerable, at least not since the Second World War. My grandparents were murdered for the crime of their ethnicity. My mother and father were jailed for criticizing the authoritarian regime of my childhood in Hungary. So I am very well aware of my good fortune to have come here as a refugee and to have been able to raise my children in this wonderful country with unlimited aspirations and unlimited hope. I think for the first time since my parents brought me here as a little girl, I have what seems to be a permanent knot of fear in my stomach. So if we honor Richard, as we are this evening, we must also honor his values. He was a patriot, first and foremost. He loved this country, but he was a patriot who today would be speaking out against the folly of banning an entire people from our land based on their religion or their ethnicity. Richard was deployed to Bosnia to save Muslims from genocide. He believed that our country is singular not because of our unmatched war machine, but because of that sacred text that begins with, "We the people." Edmund Burke famously said that it is sufficient for good men to do nothing, for evil to thrive. I've been thinking about that line a lot these past week. Doing nothing was never an option for Richard Holbrooke, who gave his all to stop Balkan authoritarianism right here in Dayton, Ohio. The only meaningful way to honor that legacy and Richard is to actively resist any version of that authoritarianism in our country. Thank you very much. Now, thank you. I would now, thank you, and thank you for remembering Richard. I would now like us to welcome Pasqualle Toscano to the stage. I don't know where you are, Pasqualle, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, because Pasqualle has a very personal introduction for our honoree Marilynne this evening. because Marilynne, he feels he has a special debt to pay to you. At a critical juncture in his life, you played a transformative role. So, Pasqualle. Over to you.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and thank you to everyone who's spoken here tonight. Let me just say that I feel immensely underqualified to be on this stage, but I'll give it my best. I first read Marilynne Robinson's Pulitzer Prize-winning Gilead as a lonely freshman in a college English course, homesick for his family and friends. But the novel's sheer luminosity brightened my life and rejuvenated my soul. The elegiac lyricism of Robinson's prose, the narrator Ames and his friend Bowden's contemplations, the hushed repose of their hometown all seemed especially needed in a world overrun by technology, competition, and freneticism. Robinson transports us to a place where quietude becomes the norm, where reflections can abound, all in Gilead, Iowa. Though certainly not a utopia, her country hamlet becomes home for Bowden's daughter Glory, who returns after plans for marriage and a career implode. It becomes home for Ames's nomadic wife Lila, and it becomes our home too, as we accompany the Ames and Bowden families through this immensely respected author's refulgent Iowa cycle. Still, Dr. Robinson's work did not assume such personal stakes for me until I suffered a spinal cord injury in 2013. I was temporarily paralyzed below the waist. I was forced to take a leave of absence from school. And, like Lori and home, I was forced to return to my hometown. Just as Robinson's protagonist must salvage her life in the wake of personal loss, so too I was challenged to envision a repurposed future for myself. It became my task, like Glory's, to forge new joy from very changed circumstances. Such is the power of literature, to breathe life into characters with whom we mourn our tribulations and celebrate our successes, as I did this past year while writing an honors thesis dedicated to Dr. Robinson's corpus. She challenges the standards which govern our lives and literature. She teaches us new ways to see the world via the consummate poise of her descriptive language. She has dedicated her career to bringing people together, which is to say the joy and agony of human relationships are the stuff of her fiction, underpinnings of a more peaceful existence on this planet we call home. It is now my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Marilynne Robinson to the stage. Thank you so much.
It's a wonderful honor to be here, in every way a wonderful honor. And I, here I am, gray hair, all that sort of thing, fairly long biography, pretty darn long biography. And the fact that, that what one does in the course of my sort of life is so valued and so honored, as if I were the matriarch of Dayton, It's beautiful. Of course, Sharon is, but I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact of this event, the honoring of the fact that something very good happened. I think that one of the I have involved myself in the history of the Middle West in the sense that I wanted to know it. And in the course of reading about people that came here in the 19th century and so on, I found that there were so many people who did things that were absolutely beautiful, things that affected American life in extremely positive ways. For example, in Ohio, the establishment of the public school system, which spread right through the country and probably contributed more to American civilization than any single idea. So many wonderful things happened here. Nameable people stood behind these things who lived generously. and who are forgotten or sometimes written about dismissively. I think a standard that any historian or biographer ought to bring to bear is, would I have done better? Typically, I think if you have to have a certain generosity in order to make a reasonable understanding of historic lives that did accomplish things like the abolition of slavery, no small thing. When you think about who the great heroes of the Civil War period were, they came from Ohio, they came from Iowa, they came from Illinois. They're worth remembering, and the choices that these people have made should be commemorated in the same way that this event commemorates Richard Holbrooke. In any case, to read my brief remarks. Wherever I go in the world, I find that people, even in the briefest, most casual interactions, react with a particular cordial respect when they learn that I am a writer. Though they know nothing at all about me in particular or about anything I have written, the mere word writer seems by itself to elicit their respect and interest. I can only conclude that I benefit from the work writers have done over the centuries. Various as it is in every way, it is cumulatively regarded as something of great value, even among those whose acquaintance with it is based strictly on hearsay. No doubt the value of books is something a great many of us simply assume. Still, literature bears pondering as a phenomenon. It is a definitively human activity, the errant thought and deep memory of civilizations preserved in that most miraculous thing, the written word. For a number of reasons, I have been reading 17th century theology. It refreshes my sense of the language to see how nimble it was in its relative youth, to read about gentle weapons in the hands of grace, and what a fume certain souls were in by the gracious motion of irascible appetite, a craving for grace the writer John Flavel calls a holy fret. Old thought is also a reservoir of concepts that are new to me, and I think entirely sound and worthy of being recovered. Flavel writes at length about breath, which for him is life and also speech, two sides of one thing. He says, quote, "A word spoken is physically transient and passed away with the breath that delivered it, but morally it is permanent. For as to its moral efficacy, no more is required but its objective existence in the minds and thoughts of them that once heard it. Abundance of good and evil will be done in this world by the dead, in the persons of others that overlive them." He floats the idea that our souls might face two judgments, one after we die and another when the full effects of our lives have played themselves out. This is a striking acknowledgement of a plain fact, that we live in historical time, and by one means or another create the reality the world will inherit. We need to own up to our impact on the intellectual atmosphere and the ethical climate. John Flavel was writing at a time when literacy was relatively limited and the spoken word was still dominant. But the persistence of effect he describes is only much greater now that language comes to us and from us in very many forms, which also preserve, even or especially, the crudest and most ill-considered things we say. If he is right, and by our words we are creating something profounder, more insinuating than heritage, something that will have consequences for our descendants long after our crass and turbulent moment is over, then the harm we do, normalizing slander and obscuring even the idea of truth, should be reckoned with the great crimes. Lately, all the old slurs have arisen again to curse us. They have acquired a new potency. We may think we know what this will mean for all our children. I suspect we don't. I came to my novel Gilead, which is situated in time between the abolitionist movement and the civil rights movement, because I came to Iowa to teach. When I asked Iowans to tell me the history of the place, they would say it has no history. So I looked into the matter myself and found a history of profound social reform, shared widely throughout the region, notably in Ohio. I found integration of every kind before the Civil War, supported by laws, churches, and social consensus, because settlers had come in the hope of creating a newly just society. Their reforms were not renounced, they did not fail, yet the very memory of them has fallen into eclipse. They gave way to the norms and laws we call Jim Crow. I have no theory to offer about how this heartbreaking and dishonorable loss was permitted and suffered. So I have no wisdom to offer about how or why such a thing might happen again. I do know that its signature is an especially callous rudeness directed against the vulnerable under the pretext of the defense of traditional values and with the smugness of assumed majority assent. Then there is that presumptive respect accorded to writers. It may be a lingering consequence of serious and generous work done in previous generations, and it might be a justified optimism that those who engage in this strange labor, who answer the demands of meaning, or at least coherency, are sound and necessary voices, disciplined by thought and language, perhaps by learning and tradition. It seems to me that the artful use of language, which was broadly aspired to, notably in pulpits, both black and white, but aspired to also by politicians and in what is called polite conversation, was an equally important discipline. The license we have given to what are still quaintly called profanities, the profane, a notion once balanced by the idea that some things are sacred, has certainly not made us articulate. Sensitive as I am to the issue of false equivalency, I do suspect that vulgarity on one side and slurs and vulgarity on the other both accelerate the general decline. Outrageous language, another superannuated phrase, is always rewarded by audience response, swoops and cheers. Shock wears off, so our public discourse is always crasser and crazier. There is another side to the power of language. This is silence. The history of the 20th century is supposed to have taught us that silence is an act, as full of consequence as anything spoken or written. It is tantamount to accommodation or collaboration. We can learn from the fact that the Puritans were right, that a human being is, first of all, essentially and inescapably a moral agent. We act in speaking well, we act in speaking destructively, and we act in falling silent. It is not possible for us to be merely innocuous. Our nature and our circumstance precludes any washing of the hands. Our descendants, whose destiny it may be to learn that there was once a democracy here, might despise us most of all for our silence, should we be guilty of it. Of course, John Flavel's account of the persistence of the spoken word means also that we can bless and benefit other generations, a thing always to be remembered. Being a Puritan cleric, he puts the matter this way: your words may stick upon men's hearts to their edification when you are in your graves. A great many words have indeed stuck upon my heart, so many that I cannot imagine myself without them, or think of what edification could mean if I had not found them waiting to teach me in this big country full of books and ideas. So great is the credit writers and books enjoy that they can cross closed borders and enter languages that are unknown to most of us. They can find their way into the hands of strangers who, as it happens, need just that book at that time to comfort them or distract them or broaden their thinking. They can weave their way into lives that are utterly remote from their authors culturally and temporally. We have more or less denied ourselves serious use of the word miracle, which at root means a thing to be wondered at. It might be useful to think of words, language, and literature as miraculous on the grounds that we cannot account for them, that we feel them pervasively, even unawares, and that while humanity deserves the name, we will never exhaust them, never come to the end of them. If I am granted the word miracle, perhaps I can also speak of reverence, even awe, in the face of their life and power. If this is granted, then greater respect and care in their creation and use might follow. This prize draws attention to the work done by writers and books in creating community where there might otherwise seem to be only angry difference. They speak to the sick and the imprisoned in the same voice as to the privileged and powerful. This is singular and wonderful. It is by far the greatest honor of my life to have had a part in it. Thank you.